One of the highlights of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a film called A Life on the Farm. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the team involved for this documentary, A Life on the Farm. We're speaking to Oscar Harding, who's the director and co-producer, Dominic Clayton, who is the assistant director and co-producer, and Edward Lomas, who is the co-producer and cinematographer. Welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us. Yeah. We're going to talk over each other at the time.
Good to talk to you all. Now, it's interesting in Australia, the National Film and Sound Archive encourages people to donate their home movies, things that they find in their garages, films, etc., because there's such an important record of people's lives, of society, etc. And this has gone a step further, of course, with your film, A Life on the Farm, with Charles Carson's incredible home movies. How did all of this all begin?
I think perhaps I should take this because I'm the maniac who kind of kickstarted sort of doing this. It's interesting you mentioned that about the Australian film archives. I wish we did that in the UK. We could really use more home movies from amateur filmmakers like Charles. So this started in 2006. My now late grandfather passed away in the rural English county of Somerset. And when the family went down to clear out his possessions, we came across this videotape, and my dad and his sisters had this vague recollection of a neighbor giving him and my late grandmother, who was the district nurse in the area, this videotape. So one of my aunts digitizes it and gives a copy to my dad as well. He sits down to watch with my sister and I, and about halfway through, he turns it off. And for over a decade, it was this mystery of what was on the other half of the tape. Why did he switch it off? But then the first half of this had so many sort of strong images that stayed with me. It became a little bit of an obsession trying to find another copy of this. And then it came up in late 2017, early 2018, in conversation with that same aunt who happened to have another copy. So I sit down, I rewatch this footage, and I feel that sometimes when you imagine something as a child, you're exaggerating it and embellishing it. But this video is every bit as fantastical as I remembered it being, if not more so. So I sit down with Dom and Ed and I show it to them, and they didn't quite believe me before they saw it. But as you'll see in the film,
actually, if I may jump in, Oscar actually told us about the tape and what was on the tape at first, and I was talking to Ed afterwards. It was like, yeah, I don't believe that. And then Oscar actually showed it to us, and I just sat there, my jaw had dropped, and I couldn't believe what I had seen.
What an incredible story. It's and it's so remarkable what's on this tape, because this guy, this farmer, had a real sense of humor and made these wonderful vignettes and life on the farm, skeletons and cows giving birth and all that sort of thing. It's just amazing stuff, and finding all that was a real find for you.
Absolutely. It was extraordinary. And, you know, when we rediscovered this footage, we realized something had to be done. Just this content and this man was extraordinary. It couldn't just, you know, stay by the wayside. It had to have an audience. And the more you learn about his life as we did and you do in the documentary, it became very clear he wanted as many people to see this as possible.
Yes. And all of these were filmed around what, the late 1980s, 1990s, that sort of time period. So it's also a snapshot of an era of British life, I suppose, on the farm.
No, absolutely. One of the things we really wanted to highlight in this is that it's a time and a place and a way of life that really is dying out. So in amongst all the humor, there is real historical and cultural importance for British rural life in Charles's footage. So yet another reason it was worth not just saving, but also getting out to a wider audience.
Exactly. Now, the added component of all of this, of course, are the interviews that are part of the documentary, including a psychologist who I found a little negative, but anyway, that's another story. How did you find, or how easy was it to get the various people that you interviewed to be part of this documentary?
I was interesting with the psychologist there. I would like to defend him just for a moment, because we were all actually in the same room when we happened to come across him. There's an excellent film about two gay farmers in the north of England called God's Own Country. And we have a program on the BBC called Country File, and he was part of this landmark segment highlighting rural mental health of gay farmers, a lot of them closeted. So we wanted to get him because, you know, when you've got a person there who's no longer alive to tell their story and, you know, share their side of things, we need to be respectful and we need to be thorough in making sure we give an accurate depiction of Charles. So we really wanted to lean into analyzing rural mental health, and that was another driving force of this. And Kieran was incredibly thorough. He and I spent a long time going back and forth, and we tried to give him as much research as we could. So I don't know. I don't know if negative's the right word. I think very thorough and very clinical as a good psychologist should be. But yeah, no, I wasn't the only one in the room there when I discovered him, and I wasn't the only one to find these interviewees. So I'm sure Ed and Dom have their highlights as well.
Okay, fair enough. And Edward, as cinematographer, you obviously shot all these interviews and other scenes that we see in the film. Was that much of a challenge for you?
Well, I think because we were almost shooting over a couple of continents, it was, I mean, I was kind of DP, but we had a lot of additional photography from Oscar and Dom. And so it kind of became this challenge of trying to make all of the footage very cohesive. And also because I suppose of what Charles shot on with tape, we wanted to kind of not mimic it, but like, you know, use that side of the kind of 90s style of filmmaking to, you know, really reflect the way that he made films, and in a way sort of reflect that in the way that we then made the film. But it was a challenge because I mean, Oscar will say we were directing, you know, films almost on Zoom at one point. And so it was a real challenge just trying to keep that consistency of quality.
Okay. Interesting. Tell me about producing this film, because obviously you need financing, you need support, etc. How easy was it to finance and make this film in the first place?
Not very. But no, so
yeah, I was gonna say let Dom answer that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want me to jump in on that? Yeah, so I think we didn't really know where we're going to go with this at the beginning. Like at the first time we watched this tape, we knew we needed to do something with it. We needed to bring this to audiences. And our initial thought was to make this as a short film. And obviously getting funding for a short film is usually pretty hard. And what we did at first is we started almost self-financing the first couple of interviews. And as we did that, as we went along, we learned so much more about Charles, and we realized that a short film isn't gonna be enough, that there's so much more. We actually had, I think our first edit was about like 3 hours long, and then we started chopping at it and really cutting it down. But it was obvious that we weren't able to finish this without any outside funding. And then we came across our executive producers, Found Footage Festival. They're curated festival who specialize in found home videos or found videos in general. They tour the world with it really and comment on these kind of videos. And so they were kind of a perfect fit for us. And Oscar approached him at a show in Milwaukee, where he's now residing actually, and where they are from as well. So there's a bit of a connection there. And they were hooked immediately. So we showed them just a little bit of the clip, and we told them that we're making this documentary about it. So they were hooked immediately, and they were, you know, kind enough to come on board as executive producers and able to partially finance the film. And then in addition to that, they also have a large fan base because they have a YouTube channel, they have their own website with their own streaming service and everything. So they were able to promote this documentary as well amongst their followers when we launched our Kickstarter. So a large part of the film was actually financed through a successful Kickstarter, which basically brought us over the finish line with the funding that we needed.
How interesting to hear that story. I hadn't heard of a found footage film festival in the first place. I mean, it's quite incredible to have a festival devoted to footage such as yours in Life on the Farm that can be presented to an audience. That is really incredible.
Yeah, they're not so much, I would say, as like a traditional film festival. They have a weekly web show on YouTube where they present the things they found. And then they also, like I said, they tour the country and they present it in usually like an hour and a half show. I don't know, Oscar, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more. But yeah, it's not like a traditional film festival that is held once a year, something like that, yeah.
No, Don pretty much hit it on the head. I was a little surprised when I went to see them live, and yeah, it's not a normal film festival. It's just sort of the name of their double act, as it were. But yeah, I had just moved to America. I'd got a job out here, so obviously things kind of ground to a halt a little bit. This was pre-COVID, and you know, I just realized, well, there's a lot of people like these guys who are finding all this incredible found footage. Maybe on top of interviewing them, they might be able to help. And it's not just them. We have Derek Beckles, who's huge with the US TV network Adult Swim. We have Everything is Terrible. They also have a little bit of a cult status. So we really wanted a modern generation to, and from another country who don't quite understand English culture in the same way, to see how it would resonate with them. And they loved it, probably even more so than some of their English counterparts, people who knew Charles and were given the tapes at the time. So I think it's really testament to his filmmaking legacy that he's able to, you know, appeal to people who are just a million miles away and from a very different way of life.
Again, very, very interesting. Charles Carson is such an interesting character, and his family, his background, his wife, all that sort of thing, which you reveal through his VHS movies in A Life on the Farm. And he has a very interesting attitude to death and to the way people depart and how he copes with that. I found that a very interesting aspect of the film.
And it ultimately became a real driving force for us. This only came about, we weren't initially aware of the idea of death positivity. It was a concept we were introduced to actually in the middle of production. And it sort of made a lot of sense and explained a lot about, you know, what Charles did and how he approached death in his films and in his life. And we found this incredible mortician, Thomas Lynch, in Michigan. And I believe it was the creative inspiration for the HBO show 6 Feet Under, which is all about life in a funeral home with kind of more progressive attitudes to death. So it really became a driving force and one of the main themes of the film in sort of really helping people to empathize with Charles's approach to death, which is more acceptable now. But at the time, I think was seen as a lot more taboo. But as Thomas said, it was the norm for centuries until we had a more kind of Christian, more conservative attitude and viewed, you know, death as this kind of taboo thing that we shouldn't celebrate and we shouldn't treat as farmers do with life and death with animals on the farm all the time.
Yeah,
I think as well it was a testament to Charles' filmmaking that in a way as a team we almost went on a journey of exploring this as we made it, and it's almost like our attitude sort of shifted over the sort of, you know, 2 and a bit years that we were making it, and it was quite an experience really. It's not something that I've kind of experienced before making films. I suppose with a documentary it was like we were watching the tape and going on this journey and also kind of making it another alongside him.
it is.
And I think the documentary kind of, reflects that, because that's the way we wanted to structure the documentary as well, where it follows sort of the journey that we went on. We're going to try to take the audience on in that hour and the 15 minutes that the film is long.
Exactly, and that goes back to something that you said earlier, that you had a 3-hour cut initially of the documentary, and then making decisions to cut it down to 75 minutes that it's now screening. Again, difficult decision making always, I suppose, in the editing process.
Well, I give all credit there to our remarkable editor, Hannah Christensen. We had previously worked with her. The three of us did a short documentary when we were at uni in Canterbury in England. So we had followed around the American football team that the English college had for an entire season. And we were just looking for a very different perspective from an American, first and foremost, sort of seeing how the Brits did it, basically. So through some mutual friends, I was connected with Hannah, and she did such a wonderful job. I still vividly remember I was living in Dublin at the time, and she was, I think, the fourth person who was brought on after the three of us. So she's been there right from the beginning. And this film would not be anywhere near as good as it is. Well, one, without Charles's footage, obviously, but also her remarkable editing skills. And she really turned this into a very humanistic and very compassionate film.
Exactly, and it is really very moving. By the time we get to the end, it's such an intriguing snapshot of this man and his family and so on, and that's what makes this such a successful documentary, I think. So congratulations on that. It works extremely well, and from what I read, you've been screening it at a number of places already.
We have. There's some rather big ones internationally that I wish we could announce, but we're still under embargo. But this is, the biggest moment of our collective careers. We couldn't be prouder. We couldn't be happier. But we had a wonderful world premiere in what is now my home city, in Milwaukee. We won the jury award there. We played Calgary, and they were fantastic, the Calgary Underground Film Festival. Just last week, we played in a barn in the middle of northern Minnesota. And I wasn't there for that, unfortunately. But yeah, of course, next we have Revelation Perth. We have Melbourne, Dom, of course, living there. We couldn't be more excited. I have family in Perth as well. So being in Australia for this really means a lot for us. And I don't think Charles could have ever imagined his work getting as far as it is.
Incredible. And I suppose your film will now encourage more people in the UK and the US perhaps as well to hunt around for VHS or old movie footage or whatever, home movies, to be able to submit them somewhere so that they can be turned into something meaningful.
Yeah, we really hope so that happens. Actually, there's a pretty interesting story that happened when we were shooting Charles's cousin, Charlie Norman, that kind of relates to what you were just saying. Ed and I were shooting this. Oscar was already in the US at that point, and it was a pandemic, so he wasn't able to travel. So I was kind of leading the interview there with Charlie. And just as we sort of stopped rolling, camera was all packed up and everything, and I started talking to him. And he just said something like, "Oh, it's a shame that you guys didn't come 2 years ago. I had about 200 tapes of Charles that I all just threw out when we moved." And I just couldn't believe that there's 200 of these tapes that Charles has made that were just kind of collecting dust in his cousin's basement, and he just decided to throw them out. And who knows what would have been on there, and there could be other things like that out there anywhere, really. So yeah, exactly. So people watching this, hunt around in your own homes. I must say an interesting blast from the past was seeing Koo Stark as part of your documentary. Was she an easy get?
No, actually, well, first of all, she was absolutely wonderful and this really important part of Charles's story. So when we approached her, obviously, this is just a competition she was involved in and gave to a random person who happened to be Charles. So to have someone reach out to you decades later and say, actually, you played an incredibly important part in his life. I think, Koo was delighted to learn about the story of this man whose life she really played a part in without even knowing it. It took a couple of years, understandably, she's quite a private person. But I was absolutely delighted when she agreed to come on board because she's an artist and a creative and a photographer, and she absolutely understood Charles's intent. And as she says in the film, that's why she gave him an award all those years ago, a fellow creative kind of seeing the inspiration behind the work.
And if I may jump in there as well, real quick. I think it's also kind of a testament to the documentary itself, because obviously when we first approached her, she was interested, but she was a bit hesitant, and it wasn't. So we pretty much had almost like a full cut of the film ready that we then showed her, which then convinced her to come on board as well. So she was the last interview we shot, and she was almost retrospectively fitted into the edit, even though we kind of always had hoped and had planned for her to be in it. But yeah, it was kind of a testament to the film itself that she was happy to come on board, as it was after she saw the initial cut.
And one of the really big challenges, again, we wrapped, and it was a reasonable time for Dom and Ed and Koo in a hotel in London we booked out to film this in. I was down in Georgia, in Savannah, at 5 a.m. So it's been a very odd process of not being in the same place for shooting most of this. Dom and Ed shot about half the film without me present. And then I was shooting stuff in America without them. There were even moments in the height of the pandemic we shot in New York and LA. I wasn't even there for health reasons. So, I was sort of directing over Zoom and over the phone with some wonderful crew we'd had to hire there. So I wouldn't recommend making a film the way we made it, but it's a miracle it all sort of came together. And again, testament to our editor, make it feel cohesive.
Yes, it certainly is cohesive. And well, how interesting how technology has allowed all of this to happen. And with the pandemic, of course, it's forced it in many respects. So congratulations on getting that all completed. Well done on that. I just want to ask you quickly individually two things. First of all, I'm quite intrigued in your filmographies. And Oscar, I know you've been involved with an Oscar-nominated film, Thebe. I'll ask each of you, how do you decide what films you get involved with? Oscar, I'll start with you.
Well, it seems like an obvious one, but first and foremost, it's the character. If you have a good story, that's obviously immediately compelling on the surface. But if you're going to spend years of your life, being involved with the project, you need to connect with those characters, be they fictional like they were in Thebe, or whether they be with documentary like Charles and other projects we've worked on. So I would always go with how much of a character is there behind the story that needs to be told.
Okay. Edward, what about you? How do you decide what you get involved with?
It's tricky because it's a real balance between, especially short filmmaking. You almost have to think about the budget at the same time as something that you're interested in, because obviously without the budget there isn't a film, and it's trying to sell those ideas to the funding bodies around Europe. And so it's that balance of like, well, am I interested in this, and also am I going to be able to find funding for this? And I think we got quite lucky with this documentary in that we kind of got a bit of both worlds, and so I think it's kind of worked out quite well that way. Okay.
And Dominic, I'm intrigued in your filmography, because you've been involved with a number of films, including Matrix Resurrections and Morbius and Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, etc. So your involvement in filmmaking is really interesting. How do you decide on that?
Well, yeah, for me, my background is actually in animation and visual effects. Which is sort of what was my entry into the film industry, and I've kind of worked on a range of like major Hollywood films through that, and I don't want to discredit that, but it's something that that I find I've always been interested in visual effects, and it was sort of the entry point for me into wanting to be a filmmaker and wanting to make films. But then at the same time, I've also got my own projects, like with Oscar and Ed together. We've made a number of short films before. We've made A Life on the Farm as well. And we've also got a short documentary, 30-minute documentary, currently or just finished, that I directed, called Heimat. And for me, it's similar to what Oscar said. It's about the characters. It's about unique characters that might not, might be underrepresented or overlooked, and that have something interesting to say. So that is perfectly true of Charles. That's perfectly true of A Life on the Farm. And like I said, it is also very much true of the documentary that I've currently finished as well. So yeah, I think very much unique, character-driven, overlooked stories, that sort of thing, I think, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Just by the by, Dominic, with Heimat, is there any relationship between that and the Edgar Wright's films that were made going back a number of years?
There's no connection there whatsoever. It's a Czech-German co-production about a man who was expelled from his home in the Czech Republic, which was called the Sudetenland before World War II, or it is known as the Sudetenland, which was mainly German inhabited. And it's his story of coming back to his former home and speaking to some of the people, actually some of the family of the man who protected him in that time of oppression. So yeah, very different to the Edgar Wright thing, but yeah.
Fair enough. So Oscar, what's next for you?
Well, as Don said, our main focus at the moment after this and, doing the international festival run for Life on the Farm is primarily Heimat. It's the next thing that the three of us have produced through our production company. Right. We're developing a few other stories at the moment. I'm currently planning to shoot a documentary out here, but that's a little bit under wraps because it's still very early days. But no, I think we're all enjoying working the documentary game. Obviously, we do work our own jobs at the minute, and the goal is to just make sure we can make a living telling these stories that we love with these characters we care for.
Fully understand. And Edward, are you involved with anything else at the moment?
So we're obviously just wrapped with Heimat, but I mean, it's kind of projects in the pipeline really. Sort of slowly writing on the kind of getting in pre-production for a couple of things. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, look, I certainly recommend that the audience has a look at A Life on the Farm, which is screening as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. And it's been my great pleasure to be speaking to Oscar Harding, Dominic Platten, and Edward Lomas. Thank you so much for talking with me about your film.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.